Now, it's working, jolly good. We start with the standard first image that tells you where you are and what day it is, and anything else that you might have forgotten on the way here. And the next thing you are going to see is two middle-aged gentlemen, and you have to figure out which one is which. Which is Andrew Gemant and which one is Lyne, Starling, Trimble? How do you know? Because you know what Gemant looks like. Probably. Okay, let me explain. The last 4 years I've been teaching impact of World War I on the sciences. And so I have enough material for 47 lectures. And we're going to try to squeeze a lot of that into just one. It'll all be all right, because when I run out of time I will stop. The unkind people described all of World War I and World War II as a civil war among the Europeans. And maybe it was always inevitable. This is Kaiser Wilhelm writing that he's always hated the English. And this is from 1912, it's before. But the lead up, this is from Gemant family. And I think every family has a picture like that from the 1890s, who was living in Vienna in the 1890s, or in Budapest in their case, I think. The paterfamilias in the middle, and the sister who didn't get the memo about wearing a white dress. And this was who was at war. A lot of Central Powers, some neutrals, the Allied powers. And you have to be careful what you call Allied, because the other side thinks they were the Allies and we were the bad guys. And it's still true, I believe. I've given a World War I talk in Germany once, and I only realized about halfway through, hey, they were on the other side. And at first, how can this possibly be a world war? Because, for 3.5 years, it all was right there. And at the end, the boundaries hadn't moved very much. It was like that. But in 1 year, in fact, this is 1915, there were battles in all of those places besides the little bit of Europe. It really was, in that sense, a world war. And it had enormous impact on not just science, but the arts and many other things. Okay. Here is a painter, one thing he did before the war and one thing he did after. That's before. That's anatomically impossible. You can't make a girl do that. But after the war, he painted things like that. He really changed his style completely. And that's the standard World War I picture of men who've been gassed, dead on the ground, hanging onto shoulders because they've been rendered blind, and a couple turning aside to be sick. And I will touch on poison gases as an example of chemistry in a few minutes, because the poison gases really only killed about 9,000 people out of the 9 million, but the effects psychologically were very severe. That's Gropius. He served, and he felt that the images he had in his mind of weapons were what he wanted to be in architecture. And so this is the Bauhaus after Gropius served in the war. And that's what the land looked like afterwards. That's what the land, oh, by the way, this was the first war where barbed wire was an important weapon. But that's what the land looked like afterwards. And this is an immediate post-war edition of 101 famous poems. It's got, well, they did a new edition after the war to include the war poems. It's got Kilmer's Trees, which is horrible. It's got Carl Sandburg's Grass, and you're going to have a bit of Carl Sandburg. He served but survived. But it's got the name of a town, and I will have to explain about the name of the town. Pile the bodies high at Austerlitz and Waterloo. Shovel them under and let me work. I am the grass, I cover all. Pile them high at Gettysburg. Pile them high at Wipers and Verdun. Shovel them under and let me work. The city to the French is Ypres. To the Germans and Dutch, it's Ypern. My father said wipers, I say wipers. And this is the one I really want, because this takes us, strangely enough, into some science. This was written by a Canadian lieutenant who died very soon afterwards, very shortly before the end of the war, after serving almost 4 years. In Flanders fields the poppies blow, between the crosses row on row that mark our places. The Brits still wear poppies on Armistice Day. But The poppies are followed almost immediately by dandelions, daisies, goldenrod, nettles, and other weeds. In other words, poppies are a first crop that comes up in land that's been devastated like that. And so the poppies were growing between their rows of crosses because they'd all made this horrible mess of the land. Music. We figured out how to make this happen. Supposedly when I press it the second time, there we go. Raise your hand if you recognize the music. Okay. Do you play? Okay, that was Ravel's Piano Concerto for the left hand alone, written for the guy who was the other half of that picture, Paul Wittgenstein, the brother of the philosopher. Paul Wittgenstein lost his right arm in the First World War. For a pianist, you might think that was an absolute utter disaster. But he commissioned a number of works for left hand alone, which are now played by pianists, some of whom have two hands, and others who, for one reason or another, have only one. But the left hand alone piano music was a direct outcome of the war. And this is a cello built out of scrap wood on the field for people. And this is Ralph Vaughan Williams in his uniform. And let me do it now while I remember. That standard officer's cap is a standard officer's cap that we'll see in many pictures. And this is a World War I officer's cap, World War I surplus. This is my father's in ROTC. The little medallion is just screwed on. You can put anything on, and his is ambulance corps. And they all have this funny extra bit of leather. I don't know what it's, but every one of them has it. Polish flyers still wear this kind of officer's cap. Anybody but me old enough to remember when all of the post office trucks and the mail boxes were olive drab? World War II surplus paint. They didn't replace it until 1976, but that's a World War I surplus cap. Now, of course, not everybody was involved in the war. There's Caruso signing autographs, and in Hollywood, the first ever feature-length film filmed here. What else do we have here? Yes, yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes. The Chicago Great Books program started up just during, exactly 1917, as a response to the war. And you will see, I think, in another picture, a World War I helmet of metal, and a chap named Edward Bullard came back to the US and turned it into the standard yellow workman's hat that you see on any construction project now. This is not our Teddy Bullard, this is a different Edward Boulevard. Different. And science, all of science suffered. Now I have three pictures that show the same thing, which is the collapse of the scientific literature during the First War and again during the Second War. So there's the First War collapse and the Second. This is from Nature. And these are papers. Notice that the percent collapse, the number of papers goes down by 60-some% for both wars, the first and the second. And here it is in a particular journal. But all of science, all of the world, and you can do a three-dimensional grid of before, during, and after, the different sciences, and the different communities that are affected. And none of those boxes is empty. Some of them have more stuff than others, but none of those boxes are empty. And very many people who survived became noted scientists afterwards. Of those who were killed during the war, relatively few were famous, but at least two. To people who do relativity, you've probably heard of Schwarzschild. People who do periodic table, you've probably heard of Henry Moseley. And you'll meet both of them again in a moment. But none of those boxes is empty. In addition, there was a great deal of international collaboration in the sciences and other things in the lead up to the war. The one I really love is there were 428 conferences in Paris in the decade before the First World War, and 100 and some in London and Brussels and Berlin and what have you. And many, many organizations were starting up in that period. I think the main causality there actually is train service, and I'll come back to trains in a moment, including the most dangerous train of World War I. You've been trying to figure out what that one was, but you'll meet it shortly. But again, a lot of international collaborations, all killed. Only a few things were allowed to survive, and I've got a list of those from the Versailles Treaty. But all kinds of nice things were happening that came to an end very quickly. General relativity. The next picture is precisely 1916 when he published the first paper, so there he is. And there he is with his two friends, Besso and the other guy, Grossman, because Einstein didn't do it all alone quite, but almost. This is Erwin Freundlich. Poor Erwin Freundlich. He was sent with Einstein's recommendation to look for light bending by the sun during a total solar eclipse in August 1914. Freundlich, of course, was German. And he went from Germany to the Crimea, where the total solar eclipse passed in August 1914. War broke out. He and his eclipse expedition were taken prisoners and their equipment taken away, and they didn't get home for a long time. Poor Freundlich. Mind you, at that time, Einstein did not have the right prediction. It was the half angle, but it hardly mattered. They were not going to make that measurement anyway. That measurement, of course, is made after the war and makes Einstein a world hero. We'll touch that. This is Einstein's writing. I think the equations are fairly easy to read and the handwriting more difficult. Other people whose German is better than mine say they can read the handwriting as well. I'm working on a totally different project at the moment, a scientific biography of someone who died recently, whose first language was Dutch. And so the propositions in his thesis are in Dutch. And I think of myself as only just barely reading German until I discovered how easy it is to read German if you've been struggling with Dutch for a day or two. One thing that Einstein records in his papers, and I've got to say, wherever, Diana's here somewhere, I know she is, but thank you again for giving me the books that have the letters of Einstein from the First World War. There you are, I think. Anyway, thank you, wherever you are, thank you. I'm not good at faces. But he went hungry. He got food parcels from Switzerland because he had sort of Swiss citizenship. But he's asking for rice and semolina and very basic things. And he lost something like 30 pounds during the war. And it's my private opinion that it made him a different person, I think is the right way to say it. But here we are, people trying to keep the crops growing. Those are American tractors on British soil, operated by British women. Women were not operating tractors until the war. We'll come back to status of women as well. And here, eat more cottage cheese and save the meat for the soldiers. And so here they are eating what's available. Another thing that came out relevant to general relativity, besides Einstein going hungry, was, of course, Karl Schwarzschild's work in the trenches. He did the first exact solution of the Einstein field equations. There is Karl Schwarzschild. He lost a lot of hair quickly. And those pictures are only about 5 years apart, and the one on the right is just before he died. But the trench he was in looked like that. That isn't the exact one, but that is one from the Russian front. He developed pemphigus, was invalided back home to Göttingen. You notice I don't pronounce it very well. I do not have the gift of tongues. My mother did. I do not. But he was invalided back home and died quite soon afterwards, about a year and a half after his son Martin Schwarzschild was born, who came to the United States and was a famous astrophysicist at Princeton and so on and so forth. Meanwhile, that's what the eclipse would have looked like, seen symbolically. That's from Lyne, actually. But you see the star and the light bending around the sun and coming to a focus at the lower right there where the observer is supposedly located. And this got worldwide attention when it was announced in 1919. This one is just water, I assure you. But that made Einstein, world famous. Where are we here? Music? 3D grid. Yes? Yeah. As the war broke out, England became very angry at being horribly dependent on Germany for a lot of things. One was optical glass. I don't know whether I'll even get to that. Another was nitrates for fertilizers and explosives. A third was a variety of kinds of personal care products. And so here are the Brits kicking out. It's not the the resolution was good enough, but I think you can't quite read that from right to left. It's 4711 Cologne. The dog is driving Lysol. The next one is aspirin. Aspirin, the name is still trademarked in many countries. It isn't here. But the world's largest chemical company, you wonder who won these wars, actually. The world's largest chemical company is still BASF, Bayern Aniline Soda Fabrik. Do I see a nod from a chemist over there? I'm tempted to buy stock in it. I have some Dow and some DuPont, and what used to be Praxair is now Linde or something. But they're still the world's largest chemical company. And aspirin was one of their trademarks. But other things that they lost, what's there? Oh, Carlsbad salts were actually from Czech territory. Formamint tablets, Centogen, and the poor dachshund is having to go back to Germany too, and the dog is crying. I don't think they found a replacement for that. On the other hand, soap was a major issue. Has anybody ever made soap at home? Oh, okay, deliberately, or was it an accident? I mean, proper soap is made with animal fat and ashes from the fire, from your campfire, right? Saponification. The first thing that happened was they ran out of animal fat, and they were making soap with vegetable oils. This is a vegetable oil soap. Anybody who wants to come touch it afterwards, feel free to do so. This is not, in fact, World War I soap. This is Indian soap, where they don't like to use animal fat because it's bad for the animals. And the olive tree hardly objects at all to your taking the olives. So this is a soap made with oil. But the real problem is you don't get very clean. What you really want is proper Paris soap. And they're selling it not... She's not supposed to be dressed that way anymore. There's a war going on, kiddo. But the point it was economical. You didn't need very much Paris soap to keep clean. And the soap in the trenches, of course, was their major weapon against trench foot and other things that happen when you have mud and dirt and very little sanitation. Another actual invention from the war is the Burberry. That's that kind of coat. And on the right is gas protection, but the heavy, oh, and there's that cap again. The heavy protective, supposedly waterproof coat. Does anybody own a raincoat that's actually really waterproof? Or does it get soaked after the first hour and a half and it weighs 4 tons when you're trying to walk around in it? Yeah, okay. That problem has not yet been solved. The Brits had been getting all their optical glass from Germany. And in fact, they secretly bought through Switzerland a large number of pairs of binoculars after the war broke out. But this is an attempt at the Brits at making a camera. Now, a German camera from the same period looks like that. This is my father's Leica. Rangefinder, the lens cap is on, of course, but the Brits didn't quite get there. This has an adjustable focus, it has a rangefinder, it has an f-stop setting, and all the things that you want in a serious camera. It's also quite heavy, but I think that one was too. But the optical glass was all coming from Germany. And every bit of Army, Navy, every officer wanted binoculars to spy out the enemy. The optical glass had been coming from Germany. What do? They actually turned some of the astronomy workshops into producing optical glass. It happened in Canada as well as the US, producing optical glass for periscopes and binoculars. And in France, in Germany, in the US, in the UK, they sent out appeals to people who had some form of periscope or telescope or binoculars at home to donate them. The Germans didn't just ask, they marched through the towns and took them out of people's houses. This, in fact, is a pre-war pair of opera glasses. It's French. And I don't think a typical officer would particularly want to try to use this on the front. This was not what they needed or what they wanted. I also have a World War II 750, I didn't bring this. But optical glass was a serious issue. And they learned. This one is just for fun. The idea was you were supposed to have your sweetheart on the front lines write home to his family, and he needed a fountain pen to do it. I think they used pencil. I have my grandfather's letters to my grandmother from earlier than this, in fact, pencil on fairly cheap paper and in pretty good condition. Whereas trying to carry a fountain pen into battle, I think, was probably a mistake. Another thing was phonographs. I got the wrong picture. Oh, that's the helmet that gets turned into the safety device when the Americans come back from war. That's the standard military helmet. But the Huns took his gramophone. The device actually looks like a small suitcase. It's about this big. You open it. You wind it because they didn't have electricity in the trenches, and they didn't have lithium batteries in those days. So you wound the thing. It had an exponential horn, and the winding gave you a spring that turned the record, and a needle simply sat, and the weight of the needle was what transferred the energy to the exponential horn. The World War II ones were exactly the same. My first record player when I was a kid was a World War II olive drab gramophone, which Father painted pink for me. Okay. We are going to chemistry. Nitrogen fixation. The air is full of nitrogen, but what you want is nitrogen compounds. You want nitric acid, you want ammonia, you want things you can make explosives and dyes and fertilizers. It's actually quite easy to get nitrogen into a compound. You just take nitrogen and hydrogen, you smash them together really, really hard. The catch is that takes very high pressure and very high temperature. And so catalysts and making it happen less energy intensively because of the cost was a major step. And this was what Germany needed to do because they'd been getting their nitrates from Chile, the guano and all the rest. And Fritz Haber developed a process that made that work. There were other processes, Birkeland and Haber and Ostwald and cyanamide. American Cyanamide Company is the one that did that. But there were various ways of making nitrogen compounds with catalysts. And after the war, all the German chemical patents were taken over by the Allied property custodian. Also Jarsberg, the astronomy abstract journal, and given to the Chemical Foundation, which is the ancestor of the Chemical Heritage Foundation, which is now part of, what's it called, Science Foundation, maybe?
Science History Institute.
Science, thank you very much, Science History Institute. Do they still have the German patents, do you think?
I don't know.
Okay, I guess they probably won't. But of course, you know what happens when anything is like this. By the end of the war, the really large factories, where were the really large factories by the end of the war? The US, of course. Within living memory, half of everything expensive in the world belonged to the United States. It's only about a third now. But the large factories, and you'll see one more, were in the US. Fertilizers are explosives. That's a modern disaster. The Journal of the American Chemical Society, I think. Fertilizers and explosives are chemically very similar. This is an explosion in a chemical factory. What the US was short of was potassium compounds. And when the war broke out, the price went, lower right-hand corner there, the price went from nothing per kilogram to a whole bunch per kilogram until the American chemists learned to do that, to make potassium muriate, I think. The really good ones, of course, were replacement for rubber and artificial dyes. The Brits had been getting all their dye stuffs from Germany, so had the French. Now, why do you need dye stuffs? Your army goes out in the field. You want your people to look different from other people, right? You don't want them all wearing the same color. So you don't want everything to be olive drab or khaki. You need dye stuffs. And that particular one, that's one of my favorites, actually. It's not indigo. It's not mauve. I showed this to an audience of chemists, and somebody piped up, it would be orange. I suppose it would be, I don't know. But I found it very impressive that somebody could look at that structure and realize, well, it's called jungle something, forgotten. But developing their own dye stuffs was a major issue. Poison gases. It's only like 1% or something of the deaths. And first it was just chlorine, and then like things like mustard gas and picric acid and sulfides and tear gas. But it had an enormous psychological effect. I'm never going to get to psychology, so just let me tell you that every country experienced what was called shell shock. We now call it post-traumatic stress disorder. It didn't involve shells, it just horrible things affect many people very badly, and should. I think we should be proud of people who suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. They've done something and they have suffered for it. But shell shock was tended to be interpreted as cowardice in those days. And people were shot for it. Not very many, but there were people shot at dawn by their own troops for experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder and refusing to go back on the front lines. But being gassed was one of the ones that really did that to many people. There was, of course, also the chap who was gassed and who got 2 of the Iron Crosses. Toward the end of the war, the Germans were giving so many Iron Crosses that the uncle of a friend of mine said, you had to be dead not to get one. There was somebody who got 2 Iron Crosses. It would have been better he was dead. Who do I mean? Who served in the First War but was much more... Yes, Adolf Hitler. Got 2 Iron Crosses in the First War. He was a messenger. He cycled back and forth carrying. It was fairly dangerous. He was gassed. What else? Oh, Rutherford never forgave Haber. Further developments led to the gases that were used in World War II camps and defoliating in Vietnam. And countries use them against their own people now sometimes. It wasn't decisive compared to barbed wire or tanks or something, but psychologically very, very traumatic. And I mentioned Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan there because he's the guy who wrote this classic book, The Effect of Sea Power Upon World History. Yes. I heard a yes from somebody.
Yep.
You go to the academy?
Naval Academy, no, but I still had to study.
Okay. And my husband's a U.S. Naval Academy graduate. I have his copy of Alfred Thayer Mahan's book. Now you see the biggest poison gas factory, of course, in the United States, right? Yeah, right. Rubber. And this was wrong-headed. This was the Brits being told to buy their own tires made in England, but they didn't have rubber to do it. You can do an awful lot of things with rubber and with coal tars. All the things that are underlined in color, I don't think you can read any of it, I can't either, but all the things underlined in color were things that were essential for the war or for people continuing to live through the war. See, it is of women. The Russians were the only ones who put out on the field battalions of women soldiers, and there is one of the women who commanded. The Brits had the WACS, the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, and this was the commander. But women did a lot of things. They were driving, they were nursing, they were doing x-rays. The first battlefield x-rays come a little bit earlier, but during the First World War, there were groups of women, many of them nurses, many of them not, who went out on the field and did x-rays to find the shrapnel inside the wounded soldier so the surgeon could get it out. Marie Curie did that. And her fatal dose of radiation, nearly everybody will say, well, she worked with polonium and all these horrible things, but she was also exposed to a lot of x-rays. Another woman who went with her, Viennese, who had to leave in 1938. Not Lisa Meitner, the other one. Marietta Blau, there we go, Marietta Blau. Also served X-raying, but for the other side. Women learned to drive. Very few women had driven before that. They worked in factories. That's German. The next one is British. They worked on testing explosives. They worked as spies. I don't have a picture of Mata Hari. And I'm not even going to sing Mata Hari from Little Mary Sunshine. But here's a woman who was a World War I spy for the Brits. They worked in ambulances. After the war, finally, women begin to appear in science labs. And I have one picture of a guy's lab and one of a gal's. And decide for yourself whether you think the guys have better facilities. Another thing that came out of the war, of course, was large numbers of programs in chemical engineering. That's the guys. We'll try the girls and then move back. Who do you think has the best labs? Probably more or less equal, right? I would say. And, oh, here. This is, again, from the Gemant collection. And this is the Oxford physics faculty. Yes, the Oxford physics faculty in about 1937, 38, somewhere around there. The ponderous guy in the center, of course, it's a professor. Gemant is on the far left side of the first row. He's written names underneath, and he calls himself I, which is reasonable enough. And there is, of course, one woman. That was Caltech, you know, when Anila and Judy and I first came. Not quite. There were 7 of us. And I've actually written that up for the American Journal of Physics, the AAPT journal. It's out if you're interested in what life was like for women at Caltech in the 60s. Munitions. These are French. The thing that struck me about the munitions was how heavily they were focused on horses. This is another of the composers who lived through the war, Edward Elgar. You know him for Pomp and Circumstance, and people graduate to, right? Also, he wrote a cello concerto as well. But he wrote after the war, I cannot do any real work with the awful shadow over us. Concerning the war, I say nothing. The only thing that wrings my heart and soul is the thought of the horses. Oh, my beloved animals. The men and women can go to hell, but my horses. I walk round and around this room, cursing God for allowing dumb brutes to be tortured. Let him kill his human beings, but how can he? Oh, my horses. And they say only girls go batty over horses. But apparently, when men were wounded, quite often when they came to, the first thing they asked was, did my horse survive? Which the answer to that, of course, is usually no, because a wounded horse is generally put out of its misery. Okay, French weaponry, a lot of it focused on horses. And then there come tanks, and more tanks, and a fake cardboard tank to fool the Germans. I don't have any pictures of submarines. My camera isn't waterproof. But I have a few things about airplanes. They had to bribe people to come serve, and they had to do an eye test. This is the brain. You may have done this if you have an ophthalmologist. This is the old-fashioned way of seeing what your range of vision is. And then first there were Zeppelins, and they didn't work very well. And this is a Blériot. This is a very early airplane. The Germans, the French, the Russians, everybody had their own airplanes. And they get better. They get higher and faster and carry more weight. And the engines mostly came from companies like BMW, and actually Bavarian Motor Works was founded to do airplane engines. They make cars now. I can't afford one, but they make them. And Rolls-Royce made airplane engines and so forth. They get better and faster. This is the 2 brothers, Manfred von Richthofen and his younger brother Lothar, who survived the war. The next one is going to be the one World War I plane you may have heard of. What's the one World War plane you might have heard of?
Sopwith Camel.
Sopwith Camel, precisely. And so here's a Sopwith Camel. And Snoopy was busy, so he sent his friend Butternut to take the plane for us. This is an American. This was Eddie Rickenbacker's. And there's the Russian one that had 4 engines and could carry about 8 people. Medicine and surgery, lots of advances in reconstruction, particularly faces. But that guy's still alive with his leg shot off. And here is an early prosthesis. This is a World War I veteran doing some useful mechanical work. The folding wheelchair was an invention of the war. And again, ambulances. And deaths, more deaths than from the war, actually, came from the flu almost immediately afterwards. And so there are flu patients and a flu, just before he died. It's not a nice picture, but there was a swine flu scare. How long ago? Was that 25 years maybe? 30 years? And the only people who bothered to get the vaccination were the ones that didn't need it because they remembered the 1918, 1919. My husband was born in 1919, and so he was exposed. He didn't need the vaccination. He's the one who got it. I didn't bother. What do we have here? Trains. Absolutely vital. That's the one with the surrender. And you've been thinking the last 10 minutes or so, right, about the most important train. That's the most important train. It's the one that carried Lenin back to Russia to start the revolution. So that was the most important train. Cratering. The moon is covered with craters. The Earth has some, but the moon has lots. And people used to say they all had to be volcanic. They couldn't be impact craters because the impacts would mostly be sideways, and the craters were all circular. World War I, there were some explosions that were definitely not volcanic, and it didn't come absolutely straight down, and yet, this is not a good picture, we've got a better one. Yeah, that's the largest of the World War I bomb craters. And it didn't come straight down, but it's a circular crater. And here is Barringer. They're quite similar, aren't they? So we now know that that's a meteorite crater. Psychology, I think I won't say anything about. The end game. This is just all the astronomers who were around doing things. I've got 2 more pages of them. Most of them served one way or another. The ones who didn't survive are mostly not famous. The ones who survived are famous. My thesis papers, the first one was refereed by a former Nazi, literally, and the second was refereed by someone who fought in the First World War on the other side. More. And now from the German point of view, if you try to read this, you probably can't, but people who read this understood military ranks. And that's a close-up of some of the names. And Karl Schwarzschild is in there somewhere. But the first 4 or 5 are the ones who are gefallen. Those were killed. The others are still in active service. And a lot of them. A bit about Moseley. He volunteered. Oh, I think the best way to show, yeah, that is Moseley, picture of Europe. What's wrong with that picture of Europe? Look how big England is compared to the rest of the continent. So that was picture. But I figured out eventually, he died in 1915 at Gallipoli. He volunteered, and his friends tried to keep him back to do war work, but he wanted to go out and fight. He was killed at Gallipoli, and my first thought was I couldn't possibly have known anybody who knew him. But in fact, the younger Bragg was a student with him, the Braggs who won the Nobel Prize for crystallography. And the younger Bragg served, and his brother was killed. But I met the younger Bragg in about 1968, so I knew one person who knew Moseley, just barely. And also one person who knew Emmy Noether, of Noether's theorem, the thing about conservation laws and invariance. Olgatowski-Todd. Some of you, how many of you who are Caltech people actually met Olgatowski-Todd? Okay, a few. So you also know somebody who knew Emmy Noether. Did you know that about yourself? No, you do. Okay. So there is, and there he is in his lab, and there he is in his goddamn hat with the same screw-on insignia and the 2 little stray pieces of leather around the sides. Yes, there he is. And what he did, it's chemistry really, but it affected physics. It sorted out the periodic table. And I think I won't take time to explain more than that, but there are whole books about him, and I wrote a long article about him that appeared in a publication in the American Chem Society a couple of years ago. What happened after the war? These are the bits in the Treaty of Versailles. I own an actual copy of the Treaty of Versailles, again bought at auction. Those are the few things that were allowed to survive, mostly medical and standards, and there were not very many. In particular, not Hale's Solar Union or any of the other science things that all had to be put together again in 1919, which is why we're having all these centenaries at the moment. All the scientific unions are now 100 years old, and the Curtis Shapley debate and other fun things out of astronomy. But these were the ones that were allowed to survive, and not very many. Oh, yes, of course. There was one that limited night work for women. So much for women astronomers. And here is the last astronomy conference before the war. And here's the first one afterwards. Somehow rather more cheerful before. The first one afterwards. The next picture is going to be the Gemants in their living room. And it's just because it's such a classic middle-class living room. You look carefully, you can see the andirons by the fireplace. My parents had andirons exactly like that. And I've got them in my apartment now. Just a classic middle-class American living room. And there's that one again. Oh, sound ranging, yes. You want to know where the enemy are. You listen for the aircraft engines. You listen for the guns firing. And you want to know distance, direction, and the size of the guns. So you need some kind of acoustic amplifier. That was the first German attempt at that. That was the British one. It's obviously much better, but they were keeping it indoors. Here's the American one. It's at least the right place at the right time. And the French one was the most elegant of all, but it wasn't ready till 1919. This is the ceasefire. The strip on the left is a recording of gunfire just before the ceasefire, the 11th of November, 11 o'clock in the morning. The right-hand side, all the little squiggly lines have gone flat because there was a ceasefire. I shall now blow a European ceasefire. And what you would expect next, of course, is but that's not what you're going to get. What you're going to get is the end game of these places are now all tourist attractions. There's Sarajevo, where the Archduke was killed and his wife started the war. Remember? You're older than you look. And Gallipoli, where they say it was a Turkish sniper, but we don't know that really, where Moseley was killed and the other Bragg brother. And Wipers, and turned into a musical comedy. Thank you very much.